hasn't always been the case. The Brits here, the Brits are always very good at coming up with good sayings. That's what people who like to talk get good at. And one of those sayings is, if you can't beat them, join them. And we, the Germans, should join the French. I mean, that's, beating the French is what we like to do on a Sunday afternoon after a hangover or Saturday night, Do you know how many Frenchmen it takes to defend Paris? Just a little poll here. No? No one knows? No wonder. No one knows. It's never been done before. I mean, even the French themselves, if you ask them. You know what the name of the elite French forces? I'm sorry, Cole. The elite French forces are called the Foreign Legion, But you fight well, you must be a foe, Only in France. So what am I saying here? For all the Germans and Northern Europeans in the house, please do yourself a favor. I mean, making beating the French illegal is like letting the best in life pass us by. We've got to be able to do that.
On that point, sir?
No, please go ahead.
Isn't it precisely to fight that kind of thinking and to protect Europeans from themselves that European integration was started in the 1950s, and wouldn't, therefore, a merged common armed forces achieve that aim?
I mean, forgive my French, but I would say au contraire. Au contraire, you're confused between a common foreign policy and a foreign military, and a common military.
You're here.
I mean, that's exactly what we're going to try. No, I'm sorry, I have a few points I need to make afterwards. So basically what I'm trying to say is that beating the French is not just fun. It's also much easier than joining the French. I mean, the French themselves can't really join themselves. Like, if you see a group of French people that seem to be united, most chances are they're not united for something, united against something. They call it a strike. It's part of their immaterial culture, along with corrida. And if you zoom out to the European level, well, here you've got the British team and the French team. They're just pretending to be like happily wedded together. But just zoom back 5 years ago, as Elizabeth said, the war in Iraq, a simple situation. We know the US was looking for somebody to bear the guilt of September the 11th. There was no proof of weapons of mass destruction. There was not a situation of stress in Europe, no economic crisis like there is now. There was no need for executive decision making. And still, we completely screwed up, let's be honest. The British were walking the footsteps of the Americans like a little puppy on a leash. The French were standing for the rest of the world. This time, they actually played it pretty well. The truth is, in an easy situation, we were never able to come up with one united solution. What am I saying? If there is a time of war, if there is a true critical crisis when executive decisions need to be made, thinking that we're actually going to be able to come up with one united opinion, one clear-cut order to give to our armed forces, it's living in a baby fantasy world. It's never going to happen. In practice, there will be 35 million different orders contradictory to each other given to our armed forces, and they won't know what to do. So before we actually unite our armed forces, we need to come up with a good, united, common policy. And that's a much longer debate. Omar here and Antonin will further elaborate on the practical difficulties in merging all our armed forces together. And I'm afraid, as we say in German, alles hat ein Ende, nur die Wurst hat zwei. Everything has an end, only the sausages too.
Here.
We are very different, clearly. So please, for all members of the House, I urge you to reject this motion and do yourself a favor. Thank you very much.
A representative of the French government.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the jury, esteemed members of the opposition and friends of the proposition, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stefan Liberatsky and I appear as the second speaker today on behalf of the French Republic. I'm here to show you why the merging of our military capabilities would be a positive response to today's new global challenges, and one which would enable Europe to find again the leading part on the world stage that it so clearly deserves. Before I begin, however, I would like to briefly address a point raised by Ms. Lemieux for Italy, that of the lack of a diplomatic structure for Europe. It's not true. We have a diplomatic corps in Europe. It's an effective one led by Catherine Ashton, the High Representative of Foreign Affairs. So the point is the structures are there and they can be made to work. But I would like to continue to talk more about the vision that we are debating and not the messy practical details, because I do not believe that the opposition has so far addressed why we are looking for a common European military force. 60 years ago, 6 European nations took a historic decision to found what would become the European Union. The aim, which remains constant even today, was to forge an everlasting peace through ever closer integration. Since then, we have witnessed the birth of a whole host of common institutions, economic, political and social. But today we find ourselves at a new crossroads in the European project. There is a glaring hole, the existence of which we cannot ignore. Why, when we have collectively the second largest armed forces in the world, have we failed to exert real influence even on our own doorstep? Why, when our spending on defence is second only to that of the USA, do we lack anything approaching a comparable global reach? And contrary to what the opposition have said, there is a real problem here which calls for a united force, and it is a problem that is both military and humanitarian. I use for illustration the example of Libya. This was a rising which took us Europeans by surprise. Within a week of it beginning, forces of the rebels were approaching the gates of Tripoli, and we did nothing. Infighting between European powers meant that we had to wait for a month before even a no-fly zone could be established, by which time it was simply too late to avert a prolonged bloody civil war. Yes?
I do agree that, yes, a unified European response would have brought much relief to the Libyan people. Yeah. But how a union that was not even able to bear one efficient recovery plan for Greece, Portugal, Ireland, would be able to merge their own armed forces? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I would certainly disagree that the response to the economic crisis was ineffective. I think it's shown the fact that we can take collective action and that we can do it not only economically but militarily. As my friend just a moment, as my friend Mr. Hansen will explain, we have the existing structures. They just need to be united and made to work better. Yes.
You were saying that in the EU you have the second largest armed forces in the world, but you do understand, sir, that it's not every country that has the second largest. Like, take, for example, Luxembourg. My question, sir, is that countries like Luxembourg, they actually do not have a large armed force, and does your side of the government understand that?
Well, yes, and that's precisely the point, that we may have small armed forces separately, but together we have the second largest in the world. And we must hang together or we will hang separately. So in my final minute, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask you just to think how different things could have been in Libya if an effective, rapid military response could have averted this humanitarian disaster, and we could have toppled a brutal dictator on our own doorstep. And I'd like you also, those of you who are perhaps old enough to remember, to cast your mind back to the events of Yugoslavia in the 1990s, and what Europe could have done there, and what it failed to do for a lack of unity. So please bear these questions in mind when you're casting your vote, because, ladies and gentlemen, l'Union peut faire la force within Europe and beyond its borders. Thank you.
I am calling a...
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the jury, my esteemed colleagues from the government and the opposition, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to explain to you today why you should oppose this motion and why the armed forces of Europe should not be merged, essentially from an economic and industrial point of view. But firstly, I'd like to engage in a bit of rebuttal, firstly against my esteemed colleagues from the Government of the United Kingdom. They mentioned response times and the possibility of getting things done quickly. I'd like to just expand on an example which has been mentioned, which is Yugoslavia. In Yugoslavia, in order to bomb targets, NATO was required to get the approval of 19 different member states. That means 19 different foreign ministries had to sign off on every single bombing target. Ladies and gentlemen, that destroys any possibility of a response time. It makes tactical operations difficult at the best. I'm sorry. And now I'll move on to my major points on the economic and industrial effects of merging Europe's armed forces and the possible challenges that this may bring.
Before you move on?
Yes?
All you have proven is that having to get the approval of 19 governments to bomb targets in Yugoslavia is ludicrous. What we are proposing, or indeed at a later stage of negotiations would end up proposing, is not that every government signs something off, but that we have a centralised command which is capable of governing, of running, of directing an army in the name of Europe. We wouldn't have David Cameron and Sarkozy and Merkel signing everything off. We'd have a commander-in-chief who would sign everything off.
Thank you very much for the question. I would suggest that there already is such an organisation. It's the European Defence Agency, created in 2004. The problem is, of course, that it doesn't work, in that the chief executive had to ring, the last time an operation was done in Chad, 6 European defence ministries, personally, in order to get one helicopter, which shows the complete inefficiency of the existing European bureaucracy in place in this area. And now, if I may, I'll move on to economic and industrial arguments. I essentially have 2. The first is that merging armed forces, and therefore merging equipment and common procurement projects, would be too expensive. The second is that it would constitute the demise of national defence companies.
On that point, sir.
No, thank you. On the first point of it being expensive, I would like to cite to the French and British governments the example of the A400 transport aircraft, which they both finance, and which is now 4 years late and 5 billion euros over budget. And both of the two governments on my right actually had to go to the United States and buy C-17 transport aircraft because the European planes that they had ordered were in fact 4 years late.
On that very point, sir.
Yes.
Don't you think the problem with this aircraft is that it had to get the approval of so many different governments and it was not a united procurement process, and that is what made it so difficult?
I would say that the reason that it was difficult was that you had the different sovereign states in it, and I don't believe that an organisation which merges combat operations will be effective. The second point that I would like to make, which should be very relevant for all the elected representatives in this room today, is of course that doing the equivalent of the Last Supper, as was done in the US in the 1990s, when the Pentagon essentially halved or brought down by a third the number of US defence companies, will of course cause mergers and put a lot of people out of jobs. Are the governments of the UK and France really willing to turn around to their populations and explain why they will lose their defence jobs and therefore lose, of course, their votes, because they should unify Europe and therefore merge, for example, tank production or strategic fighter production or attack submarine production? I'd be very interested to know what the elected representatives would say to that and say to their populations. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to oppose this motion for the 2 reasons that it is expensive and it will destroy jobs. Thank you very much.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So to this day, I have viewed the European Union as a toothless colossus. What I mean by that is that it has the capacity, for being much more than it is. European institutions have created instruments that have the potential of beaming its foreign policy objectives on the international scene, but member states seem opposed to this, and there's reluctance from several countries, including Great Britain, to do so. But the absence of Europe as an entity in making war and peace diminishes its importance and its influence on the international scene, and thus it actually diminishes the members' influence and importance on the international scene. So we need to put our role within the world, and because we do not have any projection of power, we do not have any conception of what we are as European Union. So we're nothing more than a presence, we're not an actor. So France and Great Britain, here proposing this, have had greater roles in Europe than the European Union itself, and you have been very proud of this. Yes.
You said that European countries don't have a role abroad. Could you think of, for instance, your own France resting along with Gbagbo successfully? Doesn't that show that they are very efficient?
No, I actually believe it's very efficient, but regarding through the European Union, countries are actually diminished in that scale. And that is why countries like France and Great Britain are actually moving across the EU. And that, I believe, is a pretty... sorry, no, I'll continue first. But Europe needs to grow because of our rivals, which are growing economically and militarily. And I believe that we need Europe, all member states need Europe as an entity. So let me paint a picture to you, a strong one, I guarantee. We're living through a very strong economic turning point. There's something so extraordinary, so beyond belief, after 500 years of dominance, that we are actually in denial of it. Even if we possess the world's strongest economy, the European Union, and we're in front of China, in front of the United States, we're losing our share of this economy, and it's declining rapidly. According to Goldman Sachs, for instance, China's economy will be the world's first economy in 2027. But let's just move from economics to demographics, for instance. In 1950, people like you, people like us, represented 20% of the people on Earth, and it's been calculated that in 2050 we'll represent only a fifth, therefore 10%. We're losing, there'll be less of us and more of them. Ladies and gentlemen, we must face the truth that we're losing influence on the world stage. So what, you may ask, doesn't really matter. It's not really an excuse to barricade ourselves behind a wall of firepower, you might say, and I agree with that. But with competitive neighbours, we lose and we have lost the strong cards we used to play on the diplomatic table. Diplomacy only exists when you have power behind it. And our power is declining, ladies and gentlemen. You need to restore it. That's why I believe that strong military would be a strong card to put in an arsenal. We face a situation where our neighbours are either gaining economic clouds or compensating by building and investing in the militaries. And they're boosting it. You can see Russia, you see China, for instance. So let's move to China. China has done both. As well as having the world's largest economy to be in 2025, already has the world's largest military with 2.3 active soldiers and 1.3 million reserves. I'm talking million, sorry. And they claim to have spent 100 billion in 2009 investing in its military. Why would they do so, you think? And so who are we? What power do we have to negotiate with such agents of power? Russia, India, and the United States have also increased their investments in the military during the past decades. So how are individual nations supposed to cope with such a loss of leverage? Diplomacy relies on the ability to negotiate, but how can you negotiate if you do not have the power? So it's for these reasons I believe European nations should merge their armed forces as to better protect themselves, as to have a greater weight diplomatic-wise and militarily. And I implore you to accept this motion. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Honourable Belgo, fellow members of the opposition, unfortunately misguided members of the government, members of the jury, audience, good afternoon. Today I come before you wearing black.
You're here.
I wear black because I'm sad. I'm sad that at this point today we are in a debate where we are discussing the wrong thing. I've heard so far that merging our armed forces is the only viable solution. Others have said that there is not really a problem to begin with. Why not? I've heard that it would accelerate the process of intervening somewhere where we feel that we have something to do, where we have values to support, where we have to fight for what we believe in. However, the debate is not only on the ideas. The debate is how are we going to do that? Merging our armed forces, I think that everybody on both sides would agree that it is a good idea, but not now. It is a good idea because in the future of mankind, Europe, as you mentioned, is a huge force, a huge proposition force, has so many things to bring to the world and already brought a lot: democracy, enlightenment, and so on and so forth. But to begin with, shouldn't we be looking at ourselves and tell us, well, we cannot even settle on a single aircraft. How can we possibly merge armed forces?
Here.
On that very point, sir.
Thank you. I'll go on the economics and industrial point of view of my colleague. As you know, there's been a summit recently where Angela Merkel and Sarkozy met. And at the end, they were understanding each other, so it appeared. And Sarkozy said, well, Angela, you see, we're like arms and head. And Angela Merkel replied him, no, Nicholas, you're the arm and head, I'm the banker. In the end, who will pay for that? Who will pay for the hundreds of jobs lost? Who will pay for the loss of creativity, for the diversity of research, for the diversity of everything that builds up what we are here for? Or don't you agree on this?
Have you ever heard of economies of scale? And don't you believe this is the only way we will have a viable European defense in the future, one which will not be eaten up by American defense industry?
Yeah. Economies of scale, that's a really good expression. I love that expression. Actually, It's meant to make economies when you have already stuff that could be brought together. For creativity, there is no economies of scales possible. For jobs, economies of scales equals loss of jobs. Defense, what is defense? It's defending against threats, defending against what could affect us directly, our lives, our cities, our homes. Are you proposing to defend ourselves by getting to the unemployment? Are you proposing to destroy what you've already built, simply build something else because of philosophical reasons? Ladies and gentlemen, the coalition I'm here to speak for has told you, has described you, that we're not against Europe. Far from that. We love Europe, utterly and sincerely. But for practical reasons. On the practical money, and at the end of the day, now is not the time for merging our armed forces. We have more stringent problems. For this reason, I beg you, I ask you to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the jury, lovely little girl, esteemed members of the opposition, friends for the proposition, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hervé Hansen, and I appear on behalf of the Republic of France today. I am glad the second speaker for Italy brought up the European Defence Agency and the economic question, because that's exactly what I was going to talk about, the practicalities of merging armed forces. And I'm also glad the Prime Minister of Italy mentioned the danger to national sovereignty, and the second speaker for Germany made the interesting point that we should merge our armed forces, but just not now. These are all points I think it's important to address, and I will. First of all, regarding the European Defence Agency. The European Defence Agency is precisely evidence that we've already got a structure which makes it so that it's only a small step to the full thing, to our merged armed forces. It would not be a big effort. The European Defence Agency, contrary to what was asserted by Italy, is not...
on that point, sir?
Well, decided yourselves.
You're not even able to make the Eurocorps work enough to send it to Libya, for instance. How can you make a whole army work?
That's precisely the point. We have a structure, but it's incomplete. We have to be one thing or another. In the middle, at the moment we're in the middle, we have to go all the way to a merged structure. The insufficiencies of the European Defence Agency that were mentioned, they're due to the fact that the European Defence Agency, it does not have the role of having a centralized command structure. It's there to improve...
On that point, sir.
Yes, please.
Would you actually agree that any sovereign member state of the European Union will allow its troops to be sent into a military operation with only the consent of a European bureaucrat? Do you believe that that is politically reasonable and possible at this time?
So that's precisely the motion today. This is precisely the leap of faith we require of you today, and Europe is required to take to face the challenges of this century. The European Defence Agency, in the treaty, is defined as being there to improve European defence capabilities in the field of crisis management and sustain the European security and defence policy. That's not a centralised command structure. That's why it went wrong in Charles. That's why we need merged armed forces. The economic argument now, as a second point. The second speaker for Italy said that merging would be too expensive. Surely, by virtue of economies of scale, we make efficiency savings. The second speaker for Germany criticized. No, thank you. The second speaker for Germany criticized that concept by saying precisely it didn't work in Europe. Well, on the point of Luxembourg, which was brought up by Italy, Luxembourg has a military airplane. On its own, it would make sense, but it has it because it acquired it together with Belgium. Economies of scale. It wouldn't make sense for Luxembourg to just have one of its own. Yeah. And finally, political points. The Prime Minister of Italy said there was a danger to the state in the merged European army. There would be a loss of power. There would be a loss of power through loss of sovereignty. I say loss of power, of real power, not just theoretical power, is the real loss of sovereignty. If we continue as we do now, yes, in theory, public international law will have our national sovereignty, but it will be worth nothing because we'll have no power. It is only together that we will achieve real power through the common armed forces.
Yeah.
And I will conclude by going back to what my German colleague said, by saying we should merge, but just not now. Well, we're already halfway then, agreed that the motion should be supported. We just disagree about the timing. I think we should have a culture of convictions and do the thing now. I urge you to vote for the motion. Thank you very much.
I don't know how to start. Dear Darricau, dear Chairman, members of the jury, members of the public, members of the opposing side and members of the pro side, or actually opposition and proposition, good afternoon, technically. So, I think we forgot something about this debate. It's security, ladies and gentlemen. If we want to merge or not merge forces, it's to improve security. Now, France, very typically French, has insisted that, and I'm going to quote, we need to increase our voice in the world. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, their concern is to increase the European voice in the world, not to increase your security. So perhaps their plan works, but that's not what we're aiming for. And our very good friends from the other side of the channel, perhaps the wrong side of the channel actually, explain how they want to intervene fast in regions or areas where you need peacekeeping, where you need humanitarian aid. Yes, fast. Now let's put into place bureaucracy, because it's famous. Bureaucracy is the most efficient way to deal with things. Bureaucracy is synonymous with speed. Ask the French. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do a quick sum up and explain a few of my ideas. We have explained Italy that politically it's going to be unreasonable to do it. There's going to be a lot of fighting over, and it's going to render decisions to be taken in a very difficult way. It's going to make it unstable, and therefore in the future we do not know which plans we're going to have to improve our security. This hurts security. Our second speaker mentioned how it would be so expensive. Eurofighter, for instance, another example, 5 billion to start with, 37 actually was the cost. Now I think we could use that money in a better way, no thank you, to improve the security we need, to improve computer engineering, to improve all the security that's required. Yes, please.
Don't you see that in the European Union currently the armies have many equipment, double, triple what has been needed, and where we lack transport planes? Don't you think it would be more sense to put this together to have a more efficient, less costly army?
Well, what you're offering to do is you mentioned before, economy of scale. Now, Eurofighter, as I just mentioned, was precisely that idea. Let's all build a common plane, so it will cost cheaper. Yes, it did cost really cheaper.
Here.
So I'm going to talk to you about the technical aspects. The technical aspects, well, it's going to seem very outrageous, but think of language, ladies and gentlemen. Language, Italians have trouble speaking English. I'm afraid it's the case. French people have quite a strong English accent. French accent, sorry. And I'll give you an example of airplanes, just regular airplanes, where I have this friend who's a pilot and who had actually a problem understanding a French officer commanding the landing because he had such a strong accent. And I'm sorry to pick on the French right now, no thank you. But it's the same with Italian, it's the same with Germans, because we need to find a common language. We assume it would be English, and we would have problem doing that. Now, why is this a problem for security? Why is it a problem for security? Because when you are on the field, let's not forget about the field, and you have to give orders, an officer has to give orders to its people. If it's merged, as you say, then it needs to be understood quickly. It needs to be understood clearly, which would be a problem here. The second problem is time. You need time is essential, and therefore, to go through bureaucracy would take far too much time. It's important, time is important, because imagine a column of tanks advancing in a village. You want to take a decision to bomb them very quickly. If you have to go through all the process of decision taking through a European agency, the tanks would actually have time to arrive in the village, and you could not destroy them, and they could destroy all the civilians. That is the problem. Now, another aspect is the diversity. We have different satellite systems. We could put them together, perhaps it would come cheaper if you say so, but let's realize that if we have only one system, it could be easily attacked by a virus attack. Whereas if we have several systems, it would take far much more time to be attacked. One head is easily to be chopped off, needs one blow, whereas several heads need several blows. So what we're saying is that this side, Italy, is concerned about security. It has demonstrated through these 3 points that it is a threat to security and not, and therefore, please reject the motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the public, honorable chairs, honorable judges, dear and esteemed colleagues, I come to you today as the representative of a humble nation. We used to be a great seafaring nation, and would like still to be. This year, we have decommissioned our only aircraft carrier. This is not a capability that we will have until 2020. And the Italian representative comes here and talks about defense, about security, and saying that by uniting, we will not be more secure. Well, let me tell you, when a mighty nation like Britain cannot afford such an essential military capability as an aircraft carrier, this is not in the interest of either its security or of European security. And for very practical reasons, I'm going to show you that we need this merger of European armed forces. Because what has side opposition said until now? They said European unity is desirable, and I call it Germany. And then they said it's not feasible. But what is the European Union if something that was never possible? The European Union is built on the friendship of France and Germany. People will have laughed at that 50 or 60 years ago. Those two countries as best friends. People said the euro is impossible. Well, in the European Union, everything is impossible until it has been done. And we could do this for the European army. Your point, ma'am.
Are you not aware that Britain does in fact have access to aircraft carriers through the UK-US Mutual Defence Agreement signed in 1958?
I'm very well aware of that. However, you will see in front of the Libyan coast, you do not have a UK aircraft carrier. You will also see that currently the UK does not have aircrafts capable of landing on US carriers because they do not use the same material. And you mentioned very rightly that NATO doesn't work. They said, we have cooperation and look, it doesn't work. You have to ask so many countries. You have weapons which are not compatible. And it is so difficult. And we tell you, well, yes. And this is the very reason why we need European defense. We need weapons which are compatible. We need a unified chain of command.
On that point,
and you mentioned economies of scale. No, thank you. You mentioned economies of scale. Well, you don't seem to believe in economics. That's your problem. However, if we look at the mightiest nation on earth, currently it's the United States, and they seem to do quite well out of economies of scale. But if we look at it, and if we stop contesting economies of scale, and we see that Europe faces existential threats coming in the future, we must face down both conventional threats, like Libya, nuclear threats, maybe a nuclear Iran, terrorism, and maybe other threats that we are yet unaware of. To be able to prepare for all those threats, we need to invest in many different capabilities. In so many capabilities that currently we are not able to invest in. European Union is lagging behind the United States. The Europe is lagging behind the United States because it is not investing in anti-ballistic defense. We cannot invest at the same time on our troops fighting in the front line in Afghanistan. We cannot invest at the same time in heavy artillery and tanks and prepare for future threats unless we unite. Because the side proposition has shown you clearly that there is a diplomatic interest, but there is an economic interest. And we cannot do this alone. We will lose relevance, and my partner has shown this. The European Union is already starting to lose relevance. The only way to avoid that is to come together, to unite. And of course it is not easy. But we believe that in times of great need, in times of great threats, in times of austerity like these, if we want to maintain our capabilities, we will realize that the only way to go forward is to join together, to be able to speak with one strong voice, but not only to speak, also to take action when necessary. Because a voice without a hand behind it is never something you want if you do not want to be ridiculous. For all these reasons, we beg you to propose. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Gilles. ladies and gentlemen from the jury, ladies and gentlemen from the audience, dear friends, gentlemen, and you pretty much want to go to war with everybody? Ladies and gentlemen, we do not want to join our forces with somebody who would be actually ready to go to war with pretty much everybody, but we believe in Europe. I believe in Europe. We believe that we have to build and that we can build Europe. A fair Europe, a strong Europe, and a successful one. And mark these words, fair and successful. Fair, I have a problem with this word right now today, because have a look at the countries we have around us. Italy, Germany, France, and Britain. Do you really think that a successful European army would really have any success with only these people around the table? How about Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia? What about them? We're not talking about them. We're not thinking about them. We're only thinking about the big four. And this is what flaws this motion from the very beginning. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe in Europe, but we do not believe in smoke screens. This motion is nothing more than a smoke screen. You were talking actually about having a hand and a voice. You're mixing the two. These two are completely different. You have countries whose military forces are not really that cool. Let's put it this way. But they were able to broker deals among separate sides, which was unbelievable. Like for instance, Matias Ahari, the Finnish Prime Minister, if I hope I'm not mistaken, who managed to broker deals in Sudan, which was completely unbelievable. Can anybody tell me what kind of weaponry Finland has? On this side, we have heard l'union fait la force. We have heard a view which is actually 50 years old. We have heard about Suez. That was in '56. That was colonialism. That was so old that nobody should dare bring it back to the table. Yes.
Don't you believe that defense is something that we needed 50 years ago and we will need 50 years from now, and therefore we must unite to stay strong? What did you need it for 50 years ago? Colonialism? We are proposing something new, ladies and gentlemen. We are not willing to go back 50 years ago. We are willing to build something in Europe. Something peaceful, successful, and fair. Please.
Do you not think you're being hopelessly naive by thinking that we can do everything economically and have no military clout when America is declining and China is rising?
China, how is China rising, please? Isn't it rising economically?
And
has China attacked any country around it? Absolutely not.
Yes. On that concept?
No, thank you very much. So, I was saying on this side, we had an old geopolitical view. We had a mix-up between diplomacy and action. We talked about economies of scale. But, ladies and gentlemen, what can economies of scale do against bureaucracy? And we know what European bureaucracy is. On this side, though, the German side have talked to you about why this idea is not a good idea, or at least not now, because we're not ready. Europe is not ready to move forward to the military step. We should first build our economy and build our policy, foreign policy and domestic policy. We also showed how the practicalities of their idea, of this motion are highly problematic. How can you get the Czech Prime Minister, get his public opinion to agree to join forces with Germany, for God's sake? And that is not easy. He will risk his own political career. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to propose solutions. We are here to propose that, one, we should, although they have shortcomings, we should base our defense on the NATO and the Europort. And secondly, to emphasize on small-sized military power, not united, and a strong diplomacy. We advise the European Union, as the German part, to think more about diplomacy and less about war, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
So as to better protect themselves. The motion has been discussed vigorously, And now I'm calling the jury under the co-presidents, the Franco-British co-presidents of Colonel Gilles Darricau, directeur de la formation à l'Institut des Hautes Études de Défense Nationale, and Mr. Ben Fender, conseiller stratégique de la stratégie internationale de l'ambassade de Grande-Bretagne, qui seront et également du juge indépendant Declan McCavana. I'll switch back to English. I'm calling them to go discuss and come back to us with the name of the best team.
Point in the debate, but that's what I'm wondering why.
If nobody objects, I might offer a response to that question. I think the reason that we left nuclear weapons out was twofold. Firstly, that it only really concerns around these tables two powers seated across the way. And secondly, in that nuclear weapons are so unlikely to be merged that we didn't actually think it was worth being debated. In that if, for example, the recent treaty, or the recent two treaties actually, that the UK and France signed about nuclear cooperation, if you look at them very closely, they actually only provide that the two powers seated across the way will contribute to a united research and development laboratory. They're not merging their nuclear weapons by any means. They want to maintain the deterrent force and the force de frappe completely separate. And this is for the main reason that the two great powers situated across the way developed them separately in the 40s and 50s, which was that they would never rely on somebody else to push the nuclear button. They always wanted their independent nuclear weapons, which is why we have an independent British nuclear weapon and independent French nuclear weapon. Hope that offers an answer to your question.
Integrated European army means deeper European integration. And it's true in the debate we're maybe not very clear on both sides about what that would mean, whether it would be 27 nations deciding each time we want to intervene militarily, which would play in their favor, or saying no, we would create a more unified Europe with a more unified command and a single chain of command. And I think that was a very contentious point because, well, the answer to that would more or less say who's right and who's wrong, because definitely 27 countries deciding is probably very difficult.
I think it was probably the strongest argument for the opposition, and I thought it was made very well by the first speaker for Italy, or at the start when she talked about the danger to the state. And I think when we were talking about this, we saw a problem in who would be the commander-in-chief, because clearly it can't just be 27 different people. And the best solution we could come up with was that the European Council elect somebody. But then if you look at what we have now, you'd have Herman Van Rompuy taking the decision whether to attack Libya, and that seems unsatisfactory.
And to elaborate on that, there's a point that perhaps was not made clear enough, but it's not the actual armed forces that slow down the process of engaging a threat or a counter and so on. It's the decision-making process. And perhaps I can make this point clearer.
And I do agree that there is a difference between
a very hard point in admitting that we are small countries. The world is quite big, and to answer to that, the problem of sovereignty is, well, you can veer off your sovereignty if you're big enough, if you have that critical mass. What if you get down or the other get up, does the same, and that you cannot afford that any longer?
That's quite similar, I think, to the point that they made about theoretical sovereignty means nothing if there's no real power to back it up. And the argument we tried to make was we'll be weaker apart and we'll actually be less sovereign in the end than if we sacrifice some of our theoretical sovereignty to a supranational European force.
It's a support organization. I'm curious as to what presided over the choice of the countries representing the proposition and the opposition. In other words, on one side, on the side of the proposition, we have France and Britain. On the side of the opposition, we have Germany and Italy. Those two sides happen to have historical resonance. And I'm wondering, I'm asking the question in the interest of the art of debating and in the interest of the fairness of the jury's opinion. sentence, which I'm not a part of, but I can imagine some of the intense struggling that must be going through. So how does each side square with their own impersonations of the former Allied forces of World War II on the one side and the Axis on the other side?
Actually, I'd like to make one more remark on this one. As it appears, right now, France and the United Kingdom are involved in a Franco-British treaty on defense cooperation. It's not only on nuclear weapons, it's far broader than that. But actually, a very interesting point that has been raised by diplomats during the elaboration of this treaty and the ongoing actions following this treaty is that it will work, and it should continue to work, as long as it's not the basis for a European defense union, which is striking. You have these two enormous countries on the defense side trying to join forces together, with one side raising a small point that is, we'll agree to cooperate with you, but the lot will not do it. So the question is very interesting.
What's also quite interesting is that in the in current mechanisms that exist of European defence cooperation, in particular the Ecole, which I think was only actually mentioned by Germany, Germany actually contributes the most number of troops, and Italy contributes more than the French do, and about the same as the UK does. So I don't think the division of the sides necessarily reflects their actual.
But in this debate, it does.
I'm so sorry.
In this debate, it happens to do so.
Well, I'm not 100% sure that the British and the French are more in favour of having one big European army than.
I could not agree more, but I'm asking the question about the organization of the debate.
I'm the culprit. We, as a Franco-British student,
always have. For instance, it's
why do you guys want?
Is supported by this institution or association called the Franco-British Connections, which was created by alumni and students of French and British universities. The goal is simply to promote cross-channel communications among students and alumni and politicians, economists, and business, etc. And so we support projects like this one where people want to start something that has anything remotely Franco-British in its outlook. And so if anybody here is interested in starting any sorts of project, I'd be glad to talk with you about how we could help support, help find money, help organize events, help find speakers, anything like that. Please speak to me. In any case, thank you very much for the organization of the debate, Jean-Pascal, and to all the debaters for participating.
Alors, je vous le dis en français, puisque Simon a rédigé la compétition débat cordial est une compétition bilinguistique. Vous pouvez écrire votre short essai de 5 pages en français ou en anglais. Simon a réussi, puisqu'il a rédigé son essai en français, en défendant la position française, et il a convaincu un jury binational. Voilà, donc on est heureux de lui remettre le premier prix du jury.
Félicitations, Simon. Voilà. C'était un prix de 400 €.
Un prix de 400 € qu'il recevra très bientôt.
Merci beaucoup Jean-Pascal. Alors merci à plusieurs titres. D'abord de m'avoir convaincu de participer à ce prix. Merci aussi de tes conseils nombreux lorsque je m'interrogeais sur comment rédiger cet essai. J'avoue que je suis très heureux d'avoir réussi à convaincre un quelconque jury que la France pouvait être un pays innovant, peut-être même plus que la Grande-Bretagne. J'avoue que je n'en étais pas moi-même convaincu au début de la rédaction de l'essai. Et merci donc à l'ensemble des organisateurs et du jury de m'avoir remis ce prix pour nous prononcer leur sentence.
Okay, well, good. Thank you very much indeed. We have had an enormously enjoyable afternoon, so thank you all very much for doing that. I think we were most impressed by the quality of the debate. I thought all the speakers engaged well with the audience and with each other. I thought that the presentations were very clearly put together. I'm particularly impressed by all of those whose native language is not English and who were speaking in English. I know that it's very challenging often to be put in a position where you have to speak in public in a language that's not yours. And we were very impressed as well by the way in which all speakers engaged properly with the arguments. We were most impressed, I think, by the teams that managed to produce a structured argument that had a very clear idea of their key points that they were trying to get across, that kept coming back to those, that took the arguments seriously, and those who dealt confidently with points of information. I thought there were strong individual performances in every one of the teams. So although we have a view about which is the strongest team, it's not necessarily the team where we thought there was the strongest individual performance. And we did put quite a heavy weight on teamwork and those teams who were able to recognise where we were in the debate. Those who summarised the arguments of the two opposing teams and who said, this is the really important point now and I'm going to address it. So we were looking not just at those speakers who were most fluid and persuasive in themselves, but also who recognised that they were part of a team and part of a coalition trying to convince the audience as a whole. So as I say, the winning team was not necessarily one with the strongest individual performances, but one that we felt worked best as a whole, as a team, most consistently made good points of information, and was most coherent in the arguments that it put across.
So according to us, the German team is the winning team. So congratulations.
Merci beaucoup. Peut-être que le dernier juge indépendant veut nous délivrer un message également.
Deutschland über alles. I know that when Gary Lineker talks about how soccer is played, he says soccer is very simple. There are two rules. There's Germany and then there's another team in Germany.
Take bottles. So I'm calling Omar, Antonin and Maxime to go and grab the present. You want to say something, perhaps?
Can you switch it for Guinness?
Guinness? No.
First of all, obviously, thank you. Thank you very much for this decision. I think that our team, my teammates, will agree if I say that we had no idea it could be us.
Sorry, you sure this is German?
Because we come from a debating culture that is centered about entertaining, having fun, have a good moment together in a room discussing emotions that have or do not have a real interest. For example, this morning we had a small session about such thing as Superman rather than Batman, which is obviously...
Batman won.
Today we had a debate on a real topic, and on a real topic that is of utmost importance to all of us around here in this audience. The hardest part was perhaps that attacking a more integrated union in Europe was quite hard for us. I think it was not obviously reflecting what we really think.
Well.
Okay, thanks. Ce qu'on appelle aussi la patate chaude. So, yeah, definitely. Actually, yeah. At first sight, you might think that willing for Europe not to integrate their armed forces might look anti-European or something. But the more we thought of it, and I think that our friends from Italy might agree with us, it might not be the right idea right now. Though, I would like to praise and call for you to applaud the arguments of the proposition because they were really, really awesome, and it takes two sides to make a good debate.
Right, thanks a lot for the wine. I'm really surprised when I heard they were supposed to be like perform well as a team. I thought you were actually preparing us for the fact that we had lost, because basically I don't know any of my teammates, and we just talked with Omar like 30 minutes yesterday evening. Yeah, having a beer. So we didn't exactly prepare anything, but I have to say that I actually strongly believe we should integrate our armed forces. I've been lying through my teeth the whole time, and I really enjoyed that. And that's it. Now, really, thank you very much for having us, and thank you, Declan, for allowing me to come back after so many years. Thank you.
L'équipe des gagnants, et je remercie tous les autres participants pour être venus et avoir défendu avec passion leurs idéaux et leurs politiques nationales. Je tenais aussi à remercier M. François Brunet pour son accueil très chaleureux, les membres du jury, le colonel Darricau, M. Fender et Declan McCavana. Je tenais aussi à faire un remerciement spécial à notre sponsor, la Fondation culturelle de Allianz, qui nous permet de justement continuer à promouvoir des débats. Notre prochain rendez-vous sera un débat écrit, l'édition 2011-2012 du Cordial Debate, et nous allons aussi tenter d'organiser un débat en automne prochain. Donc envoyez-nous vos adresses e-mail pour qu'on puisse vous écrire. Voilà, je vais vous circuler et je tenais aussi à remercier la belle girl, Lucie McCavana, pour sa patience et ses précieux conseils. Je vais remercier le jury, les 3 prix pour leur participation les attendent. Pour la suite des hostilités, puisqu'on parle de défense, avant qu'on puisse attaquer éventuellement le cocktail, je vous propose de faire une photo de groupe dans le jardin de la Fondation Franco-Britannique, que nous puissions ainsi laisser un souvenir à M. Brunet.
On va changer de nom, on change une lettre.
Attends, j'ai demandé un truc tout à l'heure.
Ça s'appelle ITO maintenant. ISTEO. On change juste une lettre. C'est pas grave.
Non, 2 lettres.
Oh, attends, il est où Arnaud.
Oh putain.
Quoi? C'est ce que tu vas faire. Ne dis pas, je vais le faire. T'as dit quoi? Dieu il m'en mêle.
Non mais non, attends, tu le fais maintenant, tu te fous de ma gueule, ça fait longtemps que je t'ai demandé de vider ça et ça quoi. Mais non.
Un train, c'est bon.
La poubelle elle est en bas.
C'est bon, Arnaud, t'as pris ton dress code. Arnaud.
Arrête de Pauline, t'as fini, oui.
Quoi?
Ouais, Arnaud, t'as ton dress
Il
code
était
ou pas?
trompé d'espadrille, il était... Oh oui.
C'est les lettres, c'est là.
Iman, t'as pris ton dress code? Maxime, t'as ton dress code?
Ouais, elles sont trop bien.
Et Arnaud, c'est bon ou pas?
Elles sont un peu foutues. Non, j'ai pas pris de marinière encore. Non, il faut bien.
Non mais...
Et là, sortez le
John Doe. Mais ouais, vous voulez pas que ce soit Jean de fait. Tu prends la fin?